Hello Cloud Pedagogians, welcome back to the course. In today's session, we are going to discuss about Cloud9. So what is Cloud9? Cloud9 is an integrated development environment, otherwise known as an IDE. And if you have done any kind of a development, you certainly know what an IDE is. If not, the simple definition is that it is a software application that provides facilities and tools for computer programs to develop their software. Some of the most popular IDEs are Visual Studio and Eclipse. Visual Studio became very popular with Visual Basic, Visual C#, and you can use many languages with Eclipse. Certainly, Java programmers heavily use Eclipse as their IDE. So basically, the IDE is where you develop your code. Cloud9 is an addition to the stable of IDEs available in AWS. Cloud9 contains a collection of tools that you use to code, build, run, test, and debug software, and it helps you release software to the cloud. Now, really, a distinguishing feature of Cloud9 is that you can access the Cloud9 IDE through a web browser. Awesome, right? You don't have to install anything on your machine. So, how does Cloud9 works actually? We access Cloud9 via our web browser in AWS. And our Cloud9 environments start in an EC2 instance or in our own server. So we are coming in via the web browser and we are hitting a server containing our Cloud9 environment. The other thing is we have to have a place to store the code. And that's where AWS Code Commit or maybe GitHub comes into play. In our case, we are using GitHub. Next to mention is Cloud9 environment. The environment is where we store our project files and where we run the tools to develop our applications. Now, better about Cloud9 environment, let's go ahead and start with the task. In the task 1, we will create Cloud9 environment. In task 2, we'll just take a basic tour of IDE. In task 3, we will check the resources that are created by Cloud9 after we create the environment. In task 4, we'll configure and run our student directory application in Cloud9. Finally, in task 5, we delete the whole environment. So, let's start with the task 1. Create Cloud9 environment. In this step, you use the Cloud9 console to create and then open AWS Cloud9 development environment. Search for the Cloud9 in AWS console page. Now looking at the management console, as you can see, the first thing we would do upon using Cloud9 and realize I'm just at the AWS management console. So let's click create environment. We are accessing this AWS management console via web browser. I don't have to install anything. Alright, so we can configure Cloud9. On the create environment page, for name, enter a name for your environment. For description, enter something about your environment. So we configure settings, environment settings here. For environment type, choose a new EC2 instance to create an Amazon EC2 environment. We can create an instance specifically for our Cloud9 environment or we can connect to an existing server. So let's just go ahead and create a new instance for this. This launches a new Amazon EC2 instance that AWS Cloud9 can connect to directly over SSH. And the new EC2 instance panel for instance type, and then we can select the size. For platform, choose the type of Amazon EC2 instance that you want. I'll stick with Amazon T2.micro, Amazon Linux 2. Next setting is cost saving setting. This is nice. Choose a time period for timeout. This option determines how long AWS Cloud9 is inactive before auto hibernating. When all web browser instances that are connected to the IDE for the environments are closed, AWS Cloud9 waits the amount of time specified and then shut down the Amazon EC2 instance for the environment. And you notice the options you have here. And I certainly agree with the recommendations of 30 minutes because choosing a longer time period might result in more charges to your AWS account. So there it is. On Network Settings panel, choose how your environment is accessed from the following options like SSM or SSH. SSM method accesses the environment using SSM without opening inbound ports. In SSH, this accesses the environment using SSH and requires open inbound ports. In Advanced Network Settings, choose VPC settings to display the Amazon Virtual Private Cloud and subnets for your environment. AWS Cloud9 uses Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, which is Amazon VPC, to communicate with the newly created Amazon EC2 instance. For this lab, we recommend that you don't change the pre-selected default settings. With the default settings, AWS Cloud9 attempts to automatically use the default VPC with its single subnet in the same AWS account and region as the new environment. Here you can see we have a service linked role. This allows Cloud9 to call other services on your behalf. Choose Create to create your environment, and then you are redirected to the home page. If the account is successfully created, a green flashed bar appears at the top of the Cloud9 console. You can select the new environment and choose Open in the Cloud9 to launch the IDE. Good job! You have successfully finished the task 1 by creating the environment. In task 2, we'll just take a little tour on the IDE. This part introduces some of the ways that you can use the AWS Cloud9 IDE to create and test applications. First, get your environment ready. You can use a terminal window or a run configuration window to run your code without debugging it. On the menu bar at the top of the AWS Cloud9 IDE, choose Window, New Terminal, or use an existing terminal window here. Next, how to write the code. You can use an editor window to create and edit code. On the menu bar, choose File, New File to create and save the file after you edit the code. It's just like using the general notepad in Windows. Next, run your code. After editing the code, you can either select Run over here or from the menu bar, select Run with the language you have used for your application. Depending on the program language that you are using, there might be multiple ways that you can run this code. A student directory application runs in Python. You can run using a terminal window or run configuration window. We will see how to run our student directory application code in the coming tasks. To debug the code, you can debug your code by using the debugger window here. Open the debugger window by choosing the debugger button on the right side of the IDE. Alternatively, choose Window Debugger on the menu bar. These are the basic things that we need to understand in Cloud9 to run our student directory application. Good job! You successfully completed the task 2 as well. In task 3, check the resources created by Cloud9. So that interface looks different, but a lot of what we are doing right now is just configuring an EC2 instance as our Cloud9 environment server. Similar steps to just creating an EC2 instance from the EC2 management console. And there is an overview of our settings. So realize right now that an EC2 instance is spinning up. So let's bounce over to EC2. It's already running, it's just initializing right now, but this instance will house our environment. And remember that key point is that it's set for 30 minutes of inactivity. So this server, if there is 30 minutes of inactivity, will essentially go to a stopped state and you won't be charged. When you look at the EC2 instance details page, you can see VPC settings, security groups, and an IAM role that are specifically created by Cloud9 environment. Good work! You have successfully checked the resources that are created by Cloud9. In task 4, we will configure and run our student directory application. To run the student directory application code using a terminal window, go to the terminal window that you used earlier or open a new one. I am running my user script over in the terminal. View the output from your code in the terminal window as when you enter each command. My user script is successfully completed and I can see the server is started. Now I need to add security group rules to make the application works. Here I am going to add the security group rule which allows the port 8081 for my application. Let's copy the IP address of EC2 instance and run the application in a new browser. Good, I can see my student directory application home page to make sure that my application is working fine. Let me do some changes to my application code and see the results. Here I am changing my application.py code by adding some printf statements. When I run the Flask application, I can see the print text in the terminal. That's easy, right, to change code and run the application? Good job, you have finished the task 4 by configuring and running our student directory application. In the task 5, we will delete the whole environment. Here you can select your environment and then click delete. In the deletion dialog box, enter delete and then choose delete. The delete operation takes a few minutes. Meanwhile, we can just check the EC2 environment. As you can see here, the environment was an EC2 environment and AWS Cloud9 also terminates the Amazon EC2 instance that was connected to that environment. However, if you used an SSH environment instead of SSM and that environment was connected to an Amazon EC2 instance, AWS Cloud9 doesn't terminate that instance. Just to be aware, if you don't terminate that instance later, your AWS account might continue to having ongoing charges for Amazon EC2 that are related to that instance. Good job, you have cleared the environment as well. Congratulations, you have successfully completed this lab. We have seen how the development environment that we can access via the web. And we took it a step further and actually configured an environment for our student directory application using an integrated terminal here. So with that, I'm going to end this session. Thanks for joining me and see you again in my next session. Until then, take care.